Happy day after Easter. Jesus is still risen. Our definition of good is different from God's. Writing about Jesus in his letter to the Colossian church, Paul writes in Colossians chapter 1, verses 19 and 20, "For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross." Carolyn Arends, a Canadian contemporary Christian musician, songwriter, and author, writes in her 2009 book that was called "What's So Good About Good Friday?" She writes, "I'm beginning to think our expectations are not just unrealistic, they're anti-gospel. But our confusion is hardly surprising. According to some experts, we're bombarded with more than 3,000 advertisements a day, telling us that we are entitled to and must pursue at any cost an easy, ageless, worry-free life. When we meet and accept Jesus, many of us can't help but distort his promise of abundant life into something that resembles the illusion that advertisers sell us every day. So how do we become Easter Sunday Christians who truly see and even embrace the good in our Good Fridays? How do we resist our sense of entitlement and the distorted expectations that are so deeply ingrained? I've found the following 4 principles helpful, she writes. Number 1, check the definitions. Romans 8:28 reads, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." When I read that God works all things together for good, I can't help but think of the marketer's definitions and assume that good means easy, youthful, desirable, and wealthy. But when I read the Bible, I discover that God defines good in entirely different terms. New Testament Christians seem to believe the greatest good is to become more like Jesus. They took it for granted that this process wouldn't be easy. C.S. Lewis asked, "What do people mean when they say, 'I am not afraid of God because he is good'? Have they never ever even been to a dentist?" Evidently, early Christians also assumed that the good God is much more expansive than one individual's personal circumstances. God is establishing his kingdom, doing nothing less than reconciling all things to himself, as we read in Colossians 1:20. And the ultimate good for the believer is to be included in that process. I'm immensely comforted when I remember that the God who cares deeply and personally about even a fallen sparrow is watching over me. But I've been a parent long enough to suspect that my Heavenly Father knows more than I do about what I need and where I'm going, and about what's best for the whole family. So it's a safe bet that his definition of blessing is different than mine. When I'm expecting Easter Sunday and I get Good Friday instead, I'm trying to remember that God's definition of good undoubtedly confounds and far exceeds my own. Number 2, reevaluate death. Almost all the new beginnings in my life have come from what felt at the time like terrible endings. So I know I need to re-examine my concept of death. Frequently, what seems like a small but devastating death is actually a chance at new life. I can point to dozens of dead ends in my career, ministry, or relationships that turned out to be opportunities to change direction. Nature gives us vivid examples of this principle. Like seeds, we must be willing to be broken in order to grow into what we were made to be. Like reptiles, we have to shed old skins. Like caterpillars, we must be entombed so we can emerge as completely new creations. When I think of all the energy I've expended resisting endings and change, I wonder what new life I've missed. Jesus tells us to die so that we can live. He invites us to surrender all of the illusions that we have about what makes a life good and worthwhile so that we can discover real life. And then he walks with us every step of the way as we die 1,000 deaths in the process of letting his life go deeper and deeper into us. Until at last, we really and truly physically die, only to live forever. The rumors of our demise, it turns out, are greatly exaggerated. With God, the end is the beginning. Number 3, keep time. In my non-liturgical church tradition, a church calendar is a list of youth group meetings and members' birthdays, not an ancient rhythm of days and observances. But I've been learning that many branches of Christianity throughout the centuries have used liturgical time as a way of keeping believers connected to the realities of both life and death in the faith. Cycling through Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Passiontide, Easter, Ascension, Pentecost, and back through ordinary time to Advent again, Christians are reminded that suffering is an expected part of human life. And more important, that God is constantly redeeming that suffering through his resurrection power. I'm just beginning to discover how helpful the church calendar can be in correcting and realigning my own expectations. Lent, in particular, is a fascinating season. A few years ago, when I became aware that some of my Anglican and Catholic friends went through an annual ritual of giving up some creature comfort for 40 days every spring, I responded with what I thought was a clever line. This year for Lent, I'm giving up self-control. My friends would smile, but they would challenge me to give Lent a serious try. This year, in my desire to more fully embrace Good Friday, I'm observing my first Lenten season. It's an experiment to see if denying myself one small but habitualized comfort, in my case a certain kind of food, prepares my heart to more fully enter into every part of Easter. My Lent experienced friends tell me that disrupting even one routine can expose the crutches and illusions and substitutions that keep us from authentically participating in the life Christ offers. Lent, they claim, can facilitate a small death to self that becomes an opening to new life. I aim to see if they're right. And 4, expect the unexpected. Endings that are beginnings. Death that is life. God will always confound our expectations. A couple of years ago, during a jubilant Easter service, our pastor said something that stopped me in my mental tracks. The world offers promises full of emptiness, but Easter offers emptiness full of promise. Empty cross, empty tomb, empty grave clothes, all full of promise. If I were writing the Easter story, I don't think I'd choose emptiness as my symbolic gesture. But then, I also wouldn't be talking about strength being made perfect in weakness, as we see in 2 Corinthians 12:9. Foolish things confounding the wise, 1 Corinthians 1:27. The meek inheriting the earth, Matthew 5:5. Or the poor in spirit getting, in every sense of the word get, the kingdom of heaven, from Matthew 5:3. Let's look at each of those. Strength being made perfect in weakness. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." Foolish things confounding the wise, 1 Corinthians 1:27. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. The meek inheriting the earth, Matthew 5:5, Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." And the poor in spirit getting, in every sense of the word get, the kingdom of heaven, Matthew 5:3. Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Aarons continues, and I certainly wouldn't be talking about dying in order to live. What is it about God that makes him so favor this kind of paradox? I guess this is what we should expect from the servant king, the God who decided that the best way to save the world was to let it kill him. I don't understand the way God thinks, but on those days when I feel hollowed out and broken, half dead even. It makes me glad to remember that for Easter people, even death is full of promise. The world makes a lot of promises. Smoke and mirrors, mostly. Frantic, cartoonish attempts to distract us from the gaping holes in the middle of our souls, or to sell us the latest product in order to fill them. There's no life in those promises. So I'm hoping that this Lenten season, I'll be a little more willing to die to that stuff. I'm praying I'll become more aware of the empty space within, and that I'll resist the urge to fill it with any old thing I can find. I'm going to wait, carved out, vulnerable, a cracked and crumbling jar of clay, on a life God offered to deposit anywhere there's room. I'm going to believe that if I'll just leave my empty spaces empty, He'll fill them. That, I'm convinced, is a reasonable expectation. I'm writing this during a particularly long Good Friday season in my own life. My mom is battling cancer, and I'd be lying if I said I was able to count it all joy. I pray for healing and hope desperately that it will come here on earth. I vacillate wildly between faith and doubt, openness and bitterness. But no matter what comes, I know that we do not suffer alone, because the God of the universe wore our skin and died our death and removed its sting forever. This is no meager consolation. And even in dark times when I'm sad, I look at my mom and remember, without Good Friday, there would be no Easter morning. So I pray through the night, and I wait for the resurrection. Thank you, Jesus, for the resurrection, because God knows what's good for us. And if you've stayed with me this long, look up the song Seize the Day by Carolyn Arends. That's Arends. It's a great song and definitely my favorite of hers. And I'll add the link to the song in the comments. I want to wish a happy birthday to Debbie Shepard and Peyton Spencer. Also want to mention that our Guatemala mission team will be having a takeout spaghetti dinner on May 9th. If you don't want to cook for an evening, sign up on Main Street for spaghetti, salad, and breadsticks. Cost is $12 a person or $40 for a family of 4, and all proceeds will benefit the Guatemala mission team. Men ages 18 and older are invited to put aside the honeydew list for a couple of hours on Saturday, May the 3rd to enjoy food, faith, and fraternity from 9 until 11:15 a.m. Men are invited to bring their friends, their neighbors, family members, and their appetite. And you can sign up on Main Street or call the church office. And don't forget to put May 18th on your calendar for the 25th anniversary of the Village Church and celebration of paying down the mortgage so that we can focus more on missions. There will be one service that morning at 10 a.m., lunch afterwards, games and activities, and a mission fair. You won't want to miss it. Have a great week, and remember, He is risen indeed. I love you, church.